Welcome to Week 5, where we're going to discuss transformational leadership and crisis communication. We're going to start with Jamal and Bakar, 2017. Their previous research indicates that communication plays a major role in constructing and protecting government bodies' reputation. It also helps form perceptions of multiple stakeholders, including the reputation perception that those stakeholders have, especially in crisis situations. That's why crisis communication is so key for those of us in public affairs. Now, there's three basic sections of the article. The first, the authors discuss recent advances in the study of organizational crisis and public organization reputation management. They provide a theoretical elaboration of leadership communication during crisis. The second section describes methods employed in the study and presents results. And then, of course, the final section provides some discussion, research limitations, as well as some implications for future recommendations. Okay, second article this week is Johansson. The purpose of their study was to analyze strategic leadership communication in a network of crisis communicators. Basically in a large-scale societal crisis. Now, during the crisis, they discovered that strategic leadership communication is important for establishing and sustaining those crisis networks, which they'll review with you. And they're comprised of like the rescue organizations, the public authorities, all these different entities that need to coordinate and communicate to evacuate and protect the public. Now, this is specific to that instance, but of course we can gain some lessons from that. And what I encourage you to do is to take those lessons and apply them to your own organization and your own understanding of the importance of crisis communications. The study makes 4 contributions to the current strategic communication theory and research. First, they focus on strategic leadership communication. It kind of expands the strategic communication into what they describe as a new field, which adds to previous crisis communication research. Second, they investigate how strategic leadership communication practices, how those practices contribute to establishing and sustaining that network during a crisis, that network that we talked about earlier. And then third, the findings demonstrate that strategic leadership during a crisis situation differ in significant ways from non-crisis. So as you think about your own crisis communication, think about how you're going to communicate day to day compared with what you need to communicate and how you're going to communicate during that crisis that you should be preparing for. And then finally, the article offers some practical implications for strategic leadership communication. And you can use those in preparation for your own crisis network coordination. So those are the 2 readings for the week. We also have 2 chapters from our text, Johnson and Hackman. I'm going to start with chapter 4, where we learn about transformational leadership. Your authors posit that transformational leaders are creative, interactive, visionary, empowering, and passionate. Now, this idea that transformational leaders are empowering, also sometimes known as inspirational, it elevates leaders and followers to a higher level of motivation and, of course, morality. They talk about Ted Zorn, who discovered a relationship between the complexity of a leader's communication system and the tendency to exhibit transformational leadership behavior. Zorn found that leaders with the most developed cognitive and communication abilities were the most likely to be perceived as transformational by their followers. In other words, you need to be smart and you need to know how to communicate, right? And of course, smart or intellect, that takes all kinds of different forms. It's not just about the education that we're getting here. There's other kinds of intellect as well. If I'm in a fire or a building that's on fire, sometimes the smartest person is the one that knows how to get me out of that room, right? So think about that. But that person needs to know how to communicate in a way to lead during that crisis. Okay, transformational leaders are masterful communicators. They're able to articulate, define ideas and concepts that may escape others. And remember, extraordinary leadership is first and foremost a product of extraordinary communication. There's that theme that we keep hitting on over and over. You want to be a good leader, you need to be a great communicator. Okay, if you look at page 119, there's some vision statements from Amazon, the American Medical Association, Google, Nike. There's some others on there. Take a look at those. Kind of use those as an example that you may want to emulate for your own vision statements. I also recommend 2 self-assessments in this chapter, box 4.2 on page 109, as well as the self-assessment in box 4.4, that's on page 120. Okay, chapter 13, we get to talk about crisis. Crisis is any major, unpredictable event that threatens an organization. Now, that's the textbook definition. I sometimes try to avoid the word crisis because I think that as a communicator, we should be prepared for just about anything, right? And so you can mitigate the impact of that crisis and maybe even make it less of a crisis and more of a contingency. So many of the plans that I've written are not called crisis plans, they're called contingency plans, something a little bit out of the ordinary, but we're going to be prepared as communicators to support the organization so that the organization can continue to meet its mission. Now, the authors talk about and provide a detailed list of what a crisis management plan should include. Now, that's on page 448. I think it's a pretty good example of a crisis management plan. As I said, I've written more than I care to remember over the years, and this one that your authors give you is pretty good. It's certainly a good starting point and can give you a good frame of reference for drafting one. And I would encourage you, if you are responsible for communication in your organization, and you don't have a contingency plan or a crisis plan or whatever you want to call it, use this as an opportunity to write one. Okay? Every organization should have a contingency plan, and that contingency plan should include a very robust communication plan. Okay, on page 445, you'll find a self-assessment. I encourage you to take that. You notice I love the self-assessments because I think that introspection, that personal reflection, is a great opportunity to learn and to apply what we're learning together. And then on page 439, your author lists 10 types of crisis. Don't try to memorize those, of course, but go through them, review them, see how they kind of compare with your own knowledge about crisis. I like the aircraft carrier example that's found on page 461. As a former public affairs officer aboard an aircraft carrier who was responsible for writing the crisis communication plan, I found it pretty accurate. It kind of brought back memories of my days being at sea on an aircraft carrier, where just about anything can happen when you think about it, because it's a floating city at sea. So if it can happen in your city, it can probably happen in your on the ship, and so we have to be prepared for that. All right, I'll leave you with this quote from Ralph Nader, who said, "The function of leadership is to produce more leaders, not more followers." That's that mentorship idea. Some of the best mentoring I've received has been during crisis communication. I've been fortunate to work with leaders as well as public affairs, including public affairs leaders, who helped guide me through moments of crisis that our organization was going through, and that's the crucible upon in which the metal gets hotter, and we start forming and learning about who we really are during those times. Okay, stay ahead with all assignments, stay engaged in the discussion board, and of course, always enjoy your time of learning.